this event, and I mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of a three-part series where we're fortunate to have people that are developing apps, two on the consumer side, one more on the research side. So Lucidly, the Lucid Experiment App from Northwestern, and WorldWithin. Figure we'll give roughly 15 minutes per each app to talk through, how did the app get started? How does it work? Some just kind of story about, how it came together, how it's being used, and with some time for Q&A, specifically on the individual apps. And then after that, we'll just use the rest of the time to have a free-form discussion. So if you're not able to get your individual questions in for the individual apps during their session, we'll have plenty of time after that to, in the open topics to talk about it. Then, I'm not really going to spend any time on this slide because I think we should just get into it at this point. But there's a lot of interesting functionality for mobile apps to make lucid dreaming more accessible. You're going to hear all about them from the next three presenters, and we'll talk all about them in the open topics afterwards. So with that, I will hand it over to Omar. We were saying before that it'd be preferable for you to share the slides. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, I think you could try that. How's my audio?
Yeah,
is it better? Okay. I think screen sharing is disabled.
All right. Let's let me see if I can very quickly remedy that.
Looks like it's turned on.
Oh, there we go. Great.
It's probably stop sharing, but yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Brian, for that intro, and thanks for having me tonight. I'm really excited to be here and kind of share a little bit about Lucidly. I figure I'd start with a little bit about myself just to give folks some context. I have a pretty varied background. I've sort of started and dropped careers. But the last 7 years, I've been working as a software engineer. I'm a full stack software engineer, and currently I'm a technical product manager. I do have a little bit of a background.
Real quick, Omar,
yep.
The screen's not sharing right now. If you're
it's not sharing. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I thought I clicked it. Is it on there now? Can everybody see?
I'm not seeing it, but if we can quickly figure out, like, I'll just share, and like that'd be easy.
It says I'm getting a message here that says, please grant browser access to screen recording. Is that a setting?
How about I could just share, and then like you can just say like next slide when you want me to progress. That'd probably
sure, that's fine.
All right, let me bring that back up. Be quick enough. All right, cool. And people can see the a little about me screen here.
Yep.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Thank you. So I have a little bit of a background with computer vision, and I mention this here because this is where I was initially exposed to artificial neural nets and deep learning. Obviously, for this particular purpose, it was for object detection. I've attempted to start. So I've been a founder, co-founder of a couple of companies in the past decade. And I do have a background in biotech. So right out of college, I went to work in the biotech industry for about a decade or so. And as mentioned a little earlier, I've been lucid dreaming for about 25 years. I'm not level 9. I've had to work at it, so it's never really come easy for me. But it's definitely something that I've been trying for a really long time. And so I think next slide, please. A little bit about Lucidly. I mean, this was literally one of those conversations where somebody says, "Oh, I have an app idea," except for with this particular app, I actually went out and did it. This was an inquiry. It was a friend of mine who just mentioned, I wish there was an application that could tell me when I'm dreaming. And now, this concept is not new. I was just reading a book that was written in the 90s that really talked about doing this. So the mechanism of action here has been around for a while, and I know there's been a bunch of devices that have been developed over the number of years, a bunch of Kickstarter projects. But what was interesting is that when I actually went to review, I was developing another app at the time, and when I was looking at the Apple Store, what I noticed was that we really hadn't brought this technology over to smartwatches and smartphones, and so I kind of saw an opportunity here to develop something and see if I could kind of introduce REM detection and haptic signaling using a smartphone and a smartwatch, and Lucidly was born. I'm not going to pretend like I knew what I was doing. I think when I started, I didn't even own a smartwatch at the time, so I was like literally strapping an iPhone to my leg when I was sleeping. And so, I went through a couple of iterations, looked at a bunch of research that's out there, and there's a wealth of research out on the internet. A lot of people have been looking at PPG for some time now. And so I finally settled, once I smartened up and realized that a lot of health data could be obtained using smartwatches, I settled on PPG for collecting health readings and for extracting features for machine learning training. Next slide, please. And so I developed the app. I spent quite a number of months working on it. The first version was released in May of last year, so it's been on the Apple Store for about a year and a half at this point. This is just some numbers for folks to kind of gauge what this experience has been like. It's had over 500 first-time installs. That doesn't necessarily translate into registered users, obviously. And then from the reported data on the Apple Store, it looks like there's been about 1,150 sessions to date. I do actively maintain the app. I'm the sole developer. I'm in version 1.7 right now, and hopefully releasing a new version this month. And the primary goal for the application was to assist or induce lucid dreaming, specifically through REM sleep phase targeted haptic signaling. So what does this mean? It means that I set out to attempt to be able to detect when a user is in their dreaming phase of their sleep cycle. And then I wanted to interrupt that dreaming phase with targeted haptic signals, with the purpose of the end user either recognizing that signal in REM sleep and or waking up and interrupting that sleep phase in order to provide an opportunity for lucid dreaming induction via several induction techniques. Next slide, please. So as far as features, and I believe this is still true. It was when I released it last year. It's my understanding that Lucidly was the first iOS application to attempt lucid dreaming induction via real time, and that's kind of critical here, REM detection and haptic signaling. So the application works with your smartwatch as you're sleeping, collecting health data in real time, and then sending that data to the iOS inference models or the REM detection strategy that we're using on the application for real-time detection. So that's the real main feature of the application. It's a pretty simple user interface. And what we're really promoting here is real-time REM prediction. We have a series of models that we've trained using supervised learning. So these are artificial neural nets. It's a binary classification with approximately 88% overall accuracy. So this basically means that the models will detect whether it's REM or not. There are two operating modes on the application. Inference, which is when the application is actively trying to predict when a user is in REM sleep. And hypnagogic, which was actually, this was a feature request by one of our beta testers. And this is basically just periodic haptics that are fired by the application the first 20 minutes of sleep entry. And for those users who have tried sort of like a body scan technique as they're falling asleep to induce lucid dreaming, this is sort of something that assists with that. It helps you focus as you enter sleep. And for those of you that have some machine learning background, I think one of the problems, or one of the challenges rather that I should say, with machine learning is trying to create models that are obviously generalizable to the entire population. Sleep phase prediction or sleep in general is very variable across the population. From individuals to individuals, and even nightly. And so it is really a unique challenge to try to develop models that can sort of, be generalizable enough for the entire population. And to sort of compensate for that, knowing that that's sort of an issue, One of the goals that I set out to do was to really expose as many options and controls to the end users so that they could really kind of experiment with the application and see if they could find, sort of a sweet spot. I mean, this is how I was mainly using the application for a few months. And so some of the things that we expose are prediction thresholds, which really refer to model sensitivity for REM prediction, haptic intensity. So this is just how strong the haptic feedback, session durations and alert durations. And the application also has an interesting sort of feature called the playback, which is, incidentally, this is how I was doing QA on the model. So I designed this feature largely for me to experiment with the model and just thought it was kind of a useful feature to sort of expose to end users. And what this really does is that when you sort of activate a session on Lucidly, it stores that health data on your device. And you're able to subsequently take that health data and rerun it through our models at different settings to kind of, for you to evaluate, what the sort of impact of different settings are on the predictions of our models. Next slide, please. As far as things that we're looking out to do with Lucidly, one of the things that I'm kind of interested in is this idea of haptic conditioning. I've seen some research out there that seems to indicate that a lot of these devices have improved efficacy when the end users are conditioned to the stimuli. And so in this particular case, what this would sort of maybe look like in our application is something akin to a reality check, but using the same stimulation that's naturally provided by the application during sleep. And obviously, we're a machine learning application, and so I think there's a lot of room. These were the first models that I trained, so I'm sure there's plenty of room here for improvement. One of the things that we're looking at, these first models were trained using a technique called supervised learning, which really depends on labeled data. But one of the areas that I'm looking into is unsupervised learning, which really takes in unlabeled data, raw data, and tries to categorize sleep phases using that. And so I think that could really possibly open up an opportunity for continuous learning models. So it's the idea of moving away from, this concept of generating models where one size sort of fits all, and really moving towards targeted adaptive models that are, continuously learning and improving based on usage from the individuals. And another area, obviously, that I'm looking into is incorporation of additional markers with sleep phase correlation, just to further improve our detection accuracy. And currently, we're not using motion, and that's something that I definitely want to try to incorporate in the near future. And maybe even looking at body temperature as well. I've sort of been reading some things out there that are out there in literature that are indicating that this could be some useful biomarkers. Yep. And so I guess, as an app developer, when you put something out there, you're kind of sort of biting your nails for a couple of months, waiting for that initial feedback. And so I just have to say that for me, I was definitely encouraged by early adopters. I personally do not have any experience with any lucid dreaming devices out there. Lucidly is the first device that I've ever actually used. So I was really pleasantly surprised to get feedback from one particular user who had apparently experimented with a lot of devices out there on the market. One of their sort of their emails indicated that Lucidly had outperformed a couple of these devices that were out there. So that was really, it was a great validation in the direction that we were taking this app, and just sort of really encouraged me to keep going with this. And that's it. I was going to sort of share a little bit, I have an emulator running, but maybe I can do that later during the open session if I can figure out the screen sharing. But I guess, I'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, like first off, great overview, and now good use of not relying only on the mobile app, but also tying into an actual wearable device to deliver the haptics. So that's exciting, and like excited to see where you take it with the reality checks and the haptic conditioning. I think that's like a pretty interesting direction to take it. Yeah, so let's just open it up to Q&A. I see Laura has her hand raised, so maybe we start there, and then I see Omar dropped a question in the chat, so we can go to Omar after that. Or I mean, not Omar, Diego after that.
Yes,
yeah, so Laura, go for it.
Yes, my question is about the hypnagogic setting. That specific, you said you added that later after it was requested by a beta user. And my question is, I haven't had success with the WILD method with the other settings on there that could help me get into that mode. Because every time I've tried to do it, I've just fallen asleep or just lie there not going into the hypnagogic at all. I don't currently have a smartwatch, but if this is a possible setting or a future setting, it would put that more on my radar.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Yeah, so the hypnagogic setting is like you mentioned, it was a request that somebody sort of asked. That was a beta user that requested this. They use, as you mentioned, the wild wake-induced lucid dreaming technique. It's sort of it's one approach that I've actually used quite a bit. Is a body scan approach. So that's kind of scanning your body and sort of really focusing on the tactile sensations as you're entering sleep. And so the hypnagogic setting is really intended to kind of help you focus that. And what it does is that it actually just sends periodic haptics. You can adjust the intensity and the duration of the haptics, but the idea behind it is something to help you focus as you're entering sleep. Where I've used it personally is when I run through a session of Lucidly and I'll wake up in the middle of the night or later on in the night, I will sort of switch it over to hypnagogic mode to help me sort of do wake-induced lucid dreaming as I sort of go back to sleep. So I think it is doable without a smartwatch. Something like hypnagogic setting doesn't really, I don't use any health readings for that. So, we could probably release something that's just available on your device that maybe just vibrates if you keep your device next to your bed or something. But yeah, that's a setting that could be sort of developed without smartwatch.
Nice. So
does that answer your question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it does. Because smartwatch at this point is not really in my budget. Because like they're expensive, they're a new device. They're newer than I do have an iPhone that I use all the time, and that's where the Dream Journal app I had been using it's still installed, but I don't use it that much because of the flaws I mentioned. But yeah, that was really helpful. Thanks.
Sure. Cool. So maybe we go to Diego next, and then Ryan N after that. And I see Nathan dropped a question in the chat too. So we can go Diego, Ryan, Nathan, and then maybe time for one more question after that. And we have plenty of time in the open topics after. So yeah, go for it, Diego.
Yeah. Hey, Omar, great presentation. Just to understand your challenge, training your algorithm with field data, because you have your data, that's also field data in this 500 downloads. So how do you see this challenge to really?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So obviously I didn't generate the data. I don't have a lab. So this is not data that I generated. It's based off a study that was conducted a few years ago. So as far as the original data labeled data set, it is very limited. And so that is a challenge in training any models, right? I think the more data you have, the more sort of variability you can include and sort of probably get better sort of output with more data. But this is one of the reasons why I want to look into unsupervised learning. It's one of the reasons why I want to move away from labeled data and that dependency and see if there's an opportunity to really use unlabeled data for sleep-based classification. I read I actually don't know where this was posted, and I can try and share it if I find it again. But there's a recent sort of research study that was done using unlabeled data for the classification of sleep phases, and apparently their results were very accurate. It was very promising, and in fact, I think the researchers claim to have identified previously unidentified sleep phases during this classification study. So I think there's a lot of potential there. I think it is sort of the direction for continuous learning in the AI field. So I think we'll see more things moving towards that where possible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Diego?
sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Nice. So we'll go over to Ryan and then Nathan, and then I think we'll go to Nathan's presentation there, and yeah, plenty of discussion after that. So yeah, go for it, Ryan.
Yep. My screen reader decided to throw me into the chat input window instead of on the unmute button, so that was fun. Anyway, I thank you for the presentation, Omar. Good job. And I was curious about your inference mode. When it's sending haptics to someone, when it thinks that they are in REM sleep, is it sending a specific amount or just over a specific duration? And do you have any way that you could possibly measure something from a person where you could have a way to tell it, hey, stop sending me these? Or have you gotten that far or given that thought yet?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And yeah, we have the inference models, which so we're continuously evaluating. The application is evaluating on a minute by minute basis for REM. And so to your point, we actually put certain guardrails, right? These models are not working in isolation. There's actually sort of a sandbox that they operate under. So there's, we do put some constraints around when they can fire. And so there's a little bit of, inserted logic in there. The models are not sort of firing continuously, if you will. So to your point, I do limit the haptic feedbacks that are sent out. I do limit the windows at which these models can fire, and that's intentional. So for example, one of the features that I was actually considering to implement, but was having kind of a little bit of a challenge doing so, is the idea of rolling haptics, which is, as these models are evaluating on a minute by minute basis, REM is obviously over the course of a certain, whether it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, these models will continuously fire. And so I just felt that it was safer to have a setting where you can control the duration of the haptics. So this is actually adjustable by the end user. And if the haptics wake you up, you can mute it at any time. So the end user has pretty much full control over this. But it's an excellent question. And yeah, thank you for that. Does that answer your question, Ryan?
Pretty much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, nice. And yeah, Nathan, I don't know if your question was answered from the previous response about like training data. If not, feel free to expand.
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious, kind of, so like you had some data that you had to kind of go through sleep and label as REM or not, and kind of what technology did you use to get that?
Yeah, so we did not generate that data. We, sourced already labeled data. So this was, I believe it was sourced by a university study conducted in 2017. So this was already labeled data using PPG technology. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I think that covers it. And I see, yeah, Adrian has a question, but I think like that question about like how, lucid dreaming apps work, I think that probably gets answered through the session here. And maybe with, if we get the emulator working, I think that gets a bit more tangible. So yeah, thanks again for, the overview, Omar, like great slides, definitely like helpful to like understand like how it came together, features and all of that. So yeah, definitely appreciate you putting in the time to prepare the content there. And yeah, good discussion, and we'll keep it going, for the next however many minutes here.
Thank you.
Yeah, good stuff. So yeah, next up we got Nathan. Unless if George from Berlin, if you wanted to grab the spot, knowing that it's probably going on 4 a.m. Berlin time, you could always call the audible and slot you in, or are you good to go third still?
I think that would be a good idea, actually. Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't realize you're like calling in from Berlin. Otherwise, I probably would have put you first. So yeah, maybe we jump to you, and then we'll do Nathan after that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good idea.
All right, cool.
All right, let me share.
Yeah, and again, if for whatever reason you're not able to share, I can. Oh, there we go.
Okay, is it working?
Yeah, and thanks again for joining and putting together some content here. Excited to hear more about it.
All right. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. So I will talk about our app, WorldWithin, and yeah, Ryan Torge here is speaking. Yeah, here's some screenshots of our app from our App Store listing. All right, just do it like this. Okay, yeah, like I said before, I first got into lucid dreaming in 2012, practiced then on and off again. And in high school, I met Max, the guy on the left. So this is Max, Leo, and I. We've three created the WorldWithin app. And yeah, Max and I met in high school. And afterwards, we went to Australia together for traveling. And I taught him lucid dreaming. We both kept the dream journal separately. So that was like our first moment, you know, working with lucid dreaming as a team. And then in university, we met Leo. We worked on some digital products. Yeah, and then I started learning practicing lucid dreaming again. And I checked out some apps for the first time. And I didn't like them so much. And yeah, we like building digital products. This is also what we're studying at University. So all of us do software engineering, but we also do design, marketing, so kind of everything you need to create digital products. Yeah, and then we decided, hey, you know, let's do our own lucid dreaming app. You know, an app that we want to use with the features we want to have. And then we started in December 2020. 1 month later, we launched the first version of our app. And then 7 months later, we introduced optional monthly subscription model. You know, like the basic version is free, but if you want to have more content, some extra features, you can pay like $12 a month. Yeah, some info about the app. So it got downloaded in total around 60,000 times across iOS and Android, and it's available in German and in English. Yeah, what problem are we solving? So we want to make lucid dreaming more accessible, and our approach is, so we aren't really that science-based, right? We are passionate practitioners of lucid dreaming, and we like building apps and websites. So our strengths are good UX, working together with users. So we just want to create a very frictionless experience, because what we also noticed is that it can be hard to get into lucid dreaming because there's so many different terms like wild, dialed, filed, and it's kind of acts a bit as a gatekeeper. So we try to remove some of those terms or use simpler expressions, keeping things simple. And yeah, we try to help users by 3 different ways. One is building tools that help them with lucid dreaming, like a digital dream journal. Then reality check reminders. We have a touchless alarm that you can schedule. I'm gonna show some screenshots of the app in a second. Then we have a lot of content in the app. So we have meditations that help to build up your awareness inside and outside the dream. We have sleep stories. So stories that help you fall asleep, and they kind of revolve around the theme of lucid dreaming, and you can listen to them before going to bed. We also have articles on the different parts of the theory of lucid dreaming. And yeah, one thing that's good with apps is that you can help people build up habits, because you carry your phone every day. You can receive notifications, so remind our users throughout the day about lucid dreaming. You can have like a streak, so every day you add a new entry into the dream journal, and you know, the flame, the number goes up 1 point, and you get experience when you do stuff in the app. and then you can level up, and each level you unlock a new dream guide, and then you can pick the dream guide and it shows up everywhere in the app. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing. So not that science-based, more from the like really practitioner's perspective. We try to look at what are people doing already, you know, like how are they keeping a dream journal? How can we make that maybe one step better? Yeah. Right. So here's 2 screenshots from our dream journal. So that's basically like you can just scroll down there all of your dreams. You can add new dreams. You can do voice recordings if you don't want to write things down. You can add tags inside the dream, and then you can see how often each dream symbol appeared. You can add emotions to your dream. Yeah, so this is kind of the main feature of the dream journal. Then you can set reminders like, hey, when do you want to do your dream journal? Then you will get notification. Then we have a reminder for reality checks. So you can say how many times throughout the day you want to be reminded at a random interval of doing a reality check. This is also pretty cool. And in the beginning, we only had one text in the notifications, and it was, "Are you dreaming?" And that like really annoyed some of our users because they got the same message like 10 times throughout the day. But it also really ingrained doing reality checks. A friend of mine, he has an Apple Watch, and then the notifications also appeared on his Apple Watch. And it really annoyed him because he got the notifications so often, but it started appearing also in his dream. So in his dream, his Apple Watch was vibrating, and in the dream, he was inside a store, and then the Apple Watch vibrated. And he saw the message, "Look at your hand," and then he looked at his hand, and the lines in his hand were missing. So he realized that he was dreaming. Yeah, then we also touched the alarm. So this is something that our users requested. We had people can book like sessions inside the app, which we use for like a calendar, like a meeting, which we use for getting feedback. And we also have a Discord channel where people can join. I think we have like 600 members. It's kind of dead. People don't really write anything in it, but we in the past we got a lot of feedback through that channel. And they wanted to have this alarm, and basically it's like a normal app alarm, except it turns off after some seconds. Yeah, and then you can also display several different sounds. Then we have content. So you can see like a screenshot of our content page, and then you can scroll down and you see all kinds of contents. I think you have seen those things in other apps. So we have an academy, like a basic Lucid Dreaming 101 course. We have articles, like look at the title, some advantages of lucid dreaming, a history of dream interpretation, how to use meditation to help with lucid dreaming, I guess. And yeah, we have meditations. Here you can see how it looks like when you play one of them. Yeah. So like you see, like our strength is kind of UX, being user-friendly, being very accessible. Everybody can use it. It's not that complicated. Yeah. And here's some contact infos. If you want to check out the website or like TikTok or something. Yes. That was my presentation. Any questions?
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, it's definitely more in the like educational realm, and reality checks, but like using technology to make that more accessible and fit into people's daily lives. And I think that's, yeah, looks like you guys are off to a great start there, and screenshots definitely make it come to life as far as how it works. So congrats on the early progress and traction there. Exciting.
Yeah, thanks.
So, let's open it up for questions here. And yeah, people should definitely check it out, both that and Lucidly. And like these are kind of like complementary apps too. Not that we didn't plan that on purpose, but like I could see like almost combining those in ways that are totally complementary, those different apps. Like they kind of approach the same problem from different but both effective complementary ways. Yeah, so maybe we start with Diego. So you got your hand raised.
Yeah, so happy that you have this traction towards 60,000 downloads for a lucid dreaming app. It's pretty cool. I wonder, how is your business model? How is working that? What's free and paid?
Yeah, so most of the features are free. The dream journal is completely free. Reality checks are free. Most of the restrictions are on the content. So I think we have 1 or 2 free meditations and sleep stories. And the basic course has 1 or 2 free lessons, and the rest is paid. Yeah. And then you can have a monthly package, a 3-monthly package, and yearly package. Yes, right. And it's also like people can get refunded, you know, if they don't like it. On Apple, you can just refund every app if you don't like the purchase. And on Android, you know, people can just send us a message and refund it, no questions asked.
Ooh. So the company is just you and Mark, 2 co-founders, right? Or do you have
Yes,
more?
yes.
Okay.
So like we had some of friends working with us in the past. Now there's one other, a friend of ours working with us. She has a background in psychology, so she does some of the content and things like this.
Ooh, amazing.
Yeah, good stuff. And yeah, other people feel free to raise your hand with questions, but I'm thinking of like one question that came to mind for me is, do you have any just like the most common user requests? Is there like 1 or 2 things that users really want that you don't have yet that you keep hearing about? And it's like, okay, yeah, we should really, you know, think about developing that or like putting that on the roadmap.
So one thing is having voice messages and then transcribing them into text. That's requested often, but it's also kind of hard, especially for recordings you do at night, because some of our users share their like voice messages with us, and it's very hard to understand anything. You know, like they're in the middle of the night and I just dream. No, you don't understand anything. So it's kind of hard to automatically transcribe that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. I maybe it's too much information, but like sometimes I'll do the voice memo in my Apple Watch as my own recording, but like it's me with a mouth guard in, and I'm just like mumbling just like the high level details. I can't imagine like an app transcribing that in an effective way. So totally get the challenge there. Yeah, and any other questions before we move over to Nathan and the experiment app? And we'll have the open Q&A session afterwards too. Yeah, so not seeing any burning questions here. You know, definitely, you know, thank you again for sharing about WorldWithin. Knowing that it's going on 4 a.m. Berlin time, totally feel free to like drop off and sleep. Everybody here knows that sleep is important and a priority, but also feel free to stay as much as you're able to, and you know, continue the conversations. But yeah, thanks again for joining and preparing the slides. That's great.
Yeah, thanks. I will stick around for a few minutes, but I might leave soon.
Cool. Makes sense. Yeah, so Nathan, do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to share any preference?
Oh, I can share it. Hang on, let me just do that.
All right.
There we go. Yeah, I just have some
right.
audio I wanted to share in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So I'm just going to be talking about the app that we've worked on at Northwestern University, looking at ways to induce lucid dreaming by kind of combining this meditation that's designed to induce lucidity that people do right before sleep with presenting sounds that kind of are actually linked to that meditation during REM sleep. And so kind of the inspiration for this was that Karen and some other people at a bunch of different labs all across the world a few years ago did this experiment where they were trying to see if they could communicate with lucid dreamers while they were sleeping in our lab and while they were in a dream. And so because they wanted to communicate with people in a lucid dream, they first had to get them lucid. And they came up with this procedure that they called hypertraining. And so how hypertraining works is that right before people go to sleep, and actually as they are falling asleep, you have them do this kind of mindfulness meditation. What it really focuses on is basically you're training yourself to kind of pay attention to your thoughts, the sensations in your body. So it's not kind of a traditional reality check, but it's kind of more focused on the cognitive process of becoming lucid, if that makes sense. So kind of, we're not necessarily telling people like, try and push your hand through your other hand, but we're trying to just say, become aware of like anything that is unusual. And so the interesting thing about how we do this hyper training is that we're doing the hyper training, and at the same time we're doing it, there's these beeping sounds that we're playing. And then we're actually going to play those same beeping sounds while people are in REM sleep. And so this kind of comes from another technique that our lab developed called targeted memory reactivation. And it basically just stems from the activation that if you play a sound in sleep that's linked to a memory, you can reactivate the memory of that training. So in that case, this is the memory of doing this mindfulness exercise and kind of essentially make the brain replay the memory. And we hoped that that would make people lucid. So I can show you an example of this actually. Let me just make sure the sound is set up correctly. There we go. Okay, so what will be happening, what you'll hear when you're doing this training is something like this. So that's the beeping signal that you just heard. And it comes in these kind of pairs.
As you notice the
and then
signal,
as the training, you'll get this
become
kind of prompt as you do the
lucid.
training.
Bring your attention to your thoughts. Notice where your mind has wandered. Now observe your body, your sensations, and your feelings. Observe your breath. Remain lucid, critically aware, and notice how aspects of this experience are in any way different from your normal waking experience.
Yeah, so like some of you noticed, that's Karen on that recording. So you would do this for about 20 minutes during the training part. Essentially, you hear this beeping sound at different intervals. It's always followed by that prompt to kind of practice doing this lucidity exercise. And then it stops, you kind of fall fully asleep. And then when an experimenter saw that the person was in REM sleep, they would play just this beeping sound, but not any of the words, just the beeping sound. And then people would use eye movements to signal if they became lucid. So this is the experiment that we did in the lab, or that Karen mostly did in the lab. And it appeared to work, at least in some people, in that you would play the sound and then they'd suddenly signal like, hey, I'm having a lucid dream. And when we interviewed people afterwards, they said stuff like, usually they were in a dream and then they noticed this signal that we were giving them and they thought, hey, I'm dreaming, which was kind of how we wanted it to work. So the next question we had was, okay, can you do this outside of the sleep lab? And I think that is an interesting question for a couple of reasons. One is it kind of lets us see not only does this work in theory, but kind of how well does it work in a really diverse, big group of people that is more than the people you could get in the sleep lab. And also I think, so this is kind of this specific technique, but I think it shares a lot of things in common with other approaches used to induce lucid dreaming. For example, with the Nova Dreamer, that doesn't do so much of the training, but it does present cues at night, or other approaches like in the Lucidly app where you have reality checks during the day and then you also present them at night. So this kind of is a core thing of a lot of these apps or a lot of these approaches, and we wanted to say kind of, can we look at how effective it really is? So the way we decided to do this, and we actually did a couple experiments in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about the most recent one we did, is we developed this algorithm to detect REM sleep using data streamed from a Fitbit smartwatch. So this has an accelerometer and a gyro in it, and it's also measuring the heart rate. That streams data back to an Android phone that people are using, and the phone has a machine learning algorithm that enables it to detect the start of REM sleep. And so we actually, I can share this in the chat, but we developed this, we previously developed an algorithm to detect slow wave sleep for a different project. And we actually had people sleep in our lab and we manually labeled their sleep. And so basically for this, we just used the same approach, but we told it to detect REM sleep instead of slow wave sleep. And so kind of the way this works is that people download the app. Because it's a research app, we have them do a lot of questionnaires and surveys and stuff, so we can kind of see different things about how it's working. But essentially, before each night, they do the training. Then they'll see this kind of start sleep screen. They start it, it starts getting data from the Fitbit. And then when the system thinks they're in REM sleep, it'll start presenting those beeping noises. Then when they wake up, we just ask them some questions about their sleep that we can use to look at how well this worked. So one thing about this is, so kind of whenever you do an experiment like this, like people will just have lucid dreams spontaneously is one of the things that makes it complicated. So the way we deal with that is that for the first 7 days that the person uses the app, we actually blind them. We allocate half of the participants to a control group that gets the training, but it doesn't actually play any sounds at night. And half of the participants, they do get sounds at night, and participants don't know what group they're in. But everyone is doing the dream reports, and that kind of lets us see kind of, if we do see lucid dreams, is it really because they were hearing the sound, or is it just they were spontaneously having them, or they were having them because of the training? And then the training was before each night. And like I mentioned, they do that dream report. And so the main thing that we found here, which was actually a little bit surprising and not quite what we were expecting to find, is that there seems to be there seems to be an increase in lucid dreaming over the amount of time that you use the app. And in particular, what seems to happen is that the control group and the active group seem to diverge further and further over the 7 days. And so this was like a little bit annoying because we kind of designed our experiment assuming that there would be a big difference in the first couple of days. And actually one of the things we're trying to do now is recruit more participants so we have more people at the later days. But I think it's also an interesting effect. So what you're seeing here is the number of days. So this is participants who completed 1 day, who completed 2 days, 3 days, up through 7 days. And so in these first couple of days, there's very little difference between the control and the active conditions. And again, what we're comparing here is the proportion of participants who ever had a lucid dream. So on day 1 and day 2, you don't see very much difference, but kind of as you get up there, the participants in the active conditions start to pull away, so that by the end of this day 7, about 70% of the participants in the active condition have had a lucid dream, and about 40% of the control participants have had a lucid dream. These seem to be the people who use the app are people who have kind of high baseline rates of lucid dreaming. So that is kind of why you have this high rate of lucid dreaming in the control condition. Another thing that we found is that, I was going to mention, so why does this happen? So we think that is what's really happening here is that on every night you get these sound cues. It's kind of a random process. So you have an X% chance on any given night that these sound cues actually trigger a lucid dream. And what that means is that the more exposure you get to the sound cues, over time, the more and more likely it becomes that those are actually going to trigger at least one lucid dream at some point. So it seems almost kind of like there's some sort of weird I guess I would say kind of like a window in the brain, and kind of the sound cues have to happen when the brain is in a certain state. And if they do happen in that state, you have a lucid dream. If they don't, you just get a lot of sound cues, but they don't make you lucid. So what might that state be? I mean, we're trying to target REM, but I think that's actually not necessarily the only thing that defines this critical state. And one hint to this is that one of the questions we ask people is, did you hear the sound cue in a dream? And this actually seems to be really important for telling whether a sound cue makes you lucid. So, so here we're looking at the same. Blue is the control and orange is the active condition. And so what we find is that if we just look only at the people who say they heard the cues in a dream, they have a very high rate of lucid dreaming, around 70% or so, across all nights, not just on the first night. So what that suggests is that kind of the brain has to be in a certain state that for some reason allows you to hear the cue in a dream. And if that happens, you're very likely to have a lucid dream, but kind of there's only a certain probability that will happen on each night, if that makes sense. And interestingly, so I just wanted to show, so this is a different experiment that I'm not going to talk about very much, but it was essentially a different app which just presents the cues. It uses the same protocol, but rather than trying to target REM, it presents the cues after 4 to 6 hours of sleep. And again, we're looking at the proportion of people reporting lucid dreams. This is actually just on one particular night, on night 1. And in this experiment, we see the same finding. If you heard the cue in a dream, you have about a 60% chance that that dream becomes lucid. But if you didn't report the cue in a dream, your chance of it becoming lucid is much lower. So just to kind of wrap up, I wanted to kind of go over a couple things. So what this data suggests is that this does seem to be an effect that theoretically works in kind of a broad range of people. It seems to not just be something that's true of these frequent lucid dreamers we're bringing into our lab. It seems like if you use this technique of kind of combining the meditation hyper training with some sound cues, that does seem to be able to induce lucid dreams, but it seems to do it kind of in a stochastic or random manner. Kind of there's some randomness on each night as to whether it is going to work or not. And that seems to be indexed by, does the sound cue actually get incorporated into the dream? It seems to be really important for some reason. So this is one of the questions that I'm now really interested in, is kind of, why do some cues sometimes incorporate and sometimes not? One orientation is like, it has to do with how well you're targeting REM. Another possibility is maybe sometimes it's not REM targeting, it's that kind of the person gets woken up, kind of maybe you have an arousal that happens before you have the subjective recognition. Maybe that's a reason people don't get the cue in a dream. Alternatively, maybe the cues are actually not getting loud enough for them to kind of penetrate into the dream. So those are actually kind of two diametrically opposed like possibilities that I want to look at. But this is really something that's, I mean, it could be anything really. There's some other general things you've noticed from running this app. First of all, whenever you present stimuli in sleep, it tends to disrupt sleep. Unfortunately, I don't think that there is really any good way around that, because even if people don't notice the sleep disruption, it's probably still having some effect on their health. But also, I think there's a lot of open questions now that we know this kind of theoretically works, about kind of like how do you do it in ways to make it work the best? In particular, one is, how do you control the sounds? So kind of, I think we were touched on this in the previous discussion. We can detect REM and we can start the sounds during REM, but there's a lot of questions like, is it better to stop the sounds if they leave REM, or is it better to kind of keep them going until the person actually wakes up and acknowledges it? A related question is kind of, what are the best kinds of stimuli to use? And is it better to use something that's kind of more of an ambient sound, like a soft music track, or something that is really intended to grab attention, like a beeping noise? And finally, one thing that I wanted to look at is, can you use this kind of REM detection with some other stimulation modality? So for instance, if instead of doing this kind of memory reactivation inspired approach, you could theoretically also do things like turn on a little bit of blue light when you detect REM, or turn on some sort of vagus nerve stimulator when you detect REM. I'm kind of curious whether those might work equally or better as compared to this memory reactivation approach. Yeah, and then I just wanted to if anyone wants to try our Android Fitbit app, it's called Lucid Experiment. The publisher is this cognitive neuroscience lab, and then we have the link here at the bottom.
Nice. Yeah.
If anyone has any questions? Let's see.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very good presentation. Thanks again for putting that together and sharing about the experimental app. And yeah, so yeah, same kind of drills before people have specific questions. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat, and we can just kind of go around one by one. Yeah, I see Ryan has his hand raised, so let's start there.
Thank you very much, Nathan. This one was definitely the most interesting of the three, I think, for me to listen to. Just a couple.
Oh, sorry, I think your audio just dropped out for a second, at least for me.
Yeah, I'm not hearing it either. Yeah, so maybe we come back to Ryan if the audio gets resolved. Yeah, and I definitely got a few questions too. I can toss out there too. With I was curious about the vagus nerve stimulation. Could you talk a bit more about like what you would be trying to induce with that kind of stimulation, and how that, like what's kind of like the hypothesis there of stimulating that to induce lucid dreams?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that vagus nerve stimulation does is that it has kind of a modulating effect. In particular, it seems to, and let me actually just make sure I'm not getting this wrong, but it seems to modulate the norepinephrine and I think maybe the acetylcholine system in the brain. So those are both systems that are involved in like thought to be related to lucid dreaming. That's why people take cholinergics. So the idea would be, I mean, the hypothesis is really mostly just to kind of perturb the neuromodulatory system and see if that makes people more capable of this kind of like lucid cognition. So my hypothesis, and this was from a weird experience with reality checks, is that kind of that that when people are having non-lucid dreams, like the reason you don't notice all this like weird stuff going on is that just you kind of can't engage that sort of metacognition. And maybe if you do something like vagus nerve stimulation, or even something that kind of activates the cortex a little bit, like blue light, that you might just make it easier for people to notice that the stuff going on in their dream is really weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
That makes sense.
Ryan, we actually didn't hear your question. If you wanted to put it in the chat, we could.
Yeah, you could try with see if your audio works again. If not, we could go with the chat approach.
The audio was working just fine. It was the internet that wasn't working. So slow clap for my mobile data there for a second. I would use the home internet, but it decided to die today. Apologies. I was asking if there's a certain level of, I was asking if there's like a certain level of stimulation that you're able to determine. I think particularly auditorily, that tends to be a big thing that I kind of pay attention to. First, that can, one, be incorporated into a dream and then not wake somebody up. This is something I'm kind of interested in. Is it vary from person to person? Do you actively have ways like on your app to calibrate that, to like change volumes that's used for something like this? And are you planning at any point to go to iOS? I'm not an Android user. I'd jump on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our current app, what it does is, because it has this wearable, it looks for abrupt motion to detect an arousal, and kind of that makes it stop the stimulation. And it also kind of, after it collects a couple of arousals, it uses that to estimate the threshold of sound that will give you an arousal and tries to cap the sound level below that. I think the biggest challenge with, and I think Jay also mentioned that about calibrating the auditory threshold. I think the biggest challenge with that is that kind of the auditory threshold varies a lot, even with the same person over time. In part just because the brain is doing different things, and in part because the person is moving around relative to the source of the sound, I think. So I think, yeah, we do some calibration. I'm honestly not sure how useful it is, and kind of one of my questions, so like I mentioned before, one of my questions is kind of like, maybe we need to be more aggressive at avoiding arousals, and maybe that would actually, you do more stimulation at lower intensities, maybe that works better. My other hypothesis is maybe the stimulation is actually being kept before it gets intense enough, and actually maybe people have lucid dreaming after a little bit of arousal occurs, and where it actually should not be avoiding the arousals. It's an empirical question, I think, but I think it's very tricky to regulate. In terms of the iOS question, what we're actually working on now is a web-based version of the app that could run on iOS and Android, or you could do something like you present the stimuli just using like a laptop on a website.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And the one other thought I had about like stimuli like that is, it's maybe not just the volume, but also like the type of stimulus, I think, as well, possibly, because if it's a harsh sound, it might be more likely to startle someone and wake them up. That's just the other thought I had. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Nice, good stuff. And yeah, maybe it's like different users respond to different types of cues or different intensities of like the lower intensity more frequently versus higher intensity less frequently. Like maybe there's different like phenotypes or like categories of people. They would just kind of need like this baseline period to figure it out.
Yeah, this is where all the machine learning stuff should come in handy, right? Not only the more data we have, obviously, but trying to tease out these sort of complex personal and over large crowds kind of patterns, and figure out what at least works for most, even if not for everybody, and then being able to calibrate more easily and more quickly based on a model you build over time for individuals as well.
I think honestly, we just need more data. Like I think, and we're kind of getting there as we do more of these big online experiments. But yeah, like I think that like a lot of these questions, just like no one has really gotten good evidence on like, okay, is it better to use a soft ambient sound or a loud attention getting sound? It's like a very simple experiment to do. We just need subjects.
And in the spirit of getting more people, and I think you covered it to some extent, but like best way to participate is like if you have an Android phone, go to the Google Play Store, download the app, and it's kind of like self-explanatory from there, like how to participate, right?
Yeah. And then we'll be rolling out this web-based version pretty soon, and that will also be probably when we start doing some more of these experiments, looking at kind of optimizing things.
Nice. I'm sure you'll find people in this community that are willing to participate in that once the web view is available. Yeah, see Adrian, you got your hand raised. Go for it if you got a question.
Yeah, I use Android phone. I listen to stuff when I go to sleep and stuff, but I guess I still had that question unanswered, which is how I can use it. Do I need some kind of device in addition to my phone, like a headset or something? That's fine, but do I need anything else? And also, like I'm already a lucid dreamer. I don't need a device to induce. I may need something else, but is that all the app does to induce or make it more lucid for you? I'm already lucid to the degree that I don't even feel like I'm rested. So I don't know. I'm just wondering. But I wanted to know more about the app. Nonetheless.
Yeah. So for the app that I was talking about right then, so that requires an Android phone, and it also requires a Fitbit smartwatch, because the Fitbit is what is actually measuring to see if you're in REM. We also have a slightly older version of the app. I just put the link in the chat. So this one just needs the phone. It's a slightly different experiment, but that one will do the same thing, except it just plays the sound after a time delay, essentially, if you wanted to try that one out. But I mean, honestly, the goal of it was really to look at, can we make people have more lucid dreams? So if you don't want to have more lucid dreams, I think it might not be all that useful.
Makes sense. And
I mean, I have,
Nigel?
actually many ideas about the dream realm, how technology can interfere or participate. Because there are groups of people, they actually want to dream together, for example, or, astral travel and, interact in your dreams, all that kind of stuff. But that's not what the apps are at that level just yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I think that my orientation is that there is so much that we just don't know about okay, what makes people lucid, that's really the question we're focusing on right now. And then the second, those things will be things after we get that more figured out.
yeah.
Gotcha.
And once people are lucid, it's like a choose or an adventure if you want to experiment with trying to have mutual dreams with people, or if you want to try to engage in, there's endless experiments that you could get once you're lucid.
Yeah. And I think I think that's the reason why there's not that many people who do research on lucid dreams, is that it's really hard to get people to have lucid dreams. So all the neuroscientists are just screw it, I'll go do something easier. Versus if you have the technology to if you can figure out how to make people reliably have lucid dreams, we're going to get a lot more interest in these other questions.
Well, actually, I had a question. I had a discussion on that very subject with my sleep doctor, because I asked him why I have so many dreams that I remember so vividly after I wake up, almost like I have a different life when I sleep, or many lives, because the dreams, they can be, they feel that way. And the doctor's answer was that when you sleep, you wake up frequently. You're, shifting in between the conscious and non-conscious level so rapidly. It's called, from the sleep science perspective, it's called sleep apnea. But that's actually one of the reasons that you could remember your dreams, even, when you wake up, as you're not really supposed to if you're in deep REM sleep. And ancient philosophers, they actually try to achieve that state by doing something, not allow themselves to fall asleep so deeply so they can remember their dreams, because they think the unconscious is telling them something. So that's just, what I've been experiencing. But I do have sleep apnea. And once they give me the machine, I do tend to not recall as many dreams, because I, fall asleep more deeply, if you will. But I also heard someone said the opposite. Then they couldn't remember their dreams, but once they start using that sleep machine, it's called CPAC, they could remember more. I guess we are all very different. And that's sort of proves that the theory incorrect. I don't know.
I think that's one of the main difficulties, is so many people are different, and there's so many confounding factors that might make somebody, more likely to lucid dream or less likely to lucid dream. It's not as simple as one factor. It's so many different factors that kind of combine in complex ways. But yeah, thanks for.
I think narcoleptics there's some cases, known cases of highly lucid dreamers in narcoleptics, and
the tricky thing is it's so complicated. Some people, you interrupt their sleep a lot, they will remember their dreams more because there's these periods of wakefulness. Other times that just kind of prevents them from going into REM with other people, and then they don't remember their dreams because there really aren't any dreams there to remember. So yeah, I think it's like a lot of sleep science things, quite complicated.
Yeah, I got the cursed insomnia, not the good insomnia.
And yeah, I think this is a good, we're already kind of doing it, but it's a good segue to just kind of open it up for general topics and discussion. So, if people didn't have or weren't able to ask questions to Omar about the Lucidly app, a good time to like resurface those kind of questions too, especially after the WorldWithin app presentation and Nathan's presentation. And, we can just kind of have a free form discussion for like at least the next 15 minutes, if not a bit more. Like I'll at least be around for a while as long as like people want to hang out. So, and there's a few questions in the chat here too. Maybe if anybody that asked a question in the chat, feel free to ask them verbally, or I could just go in there and kind of like dig one out if there's any that
temperature one is interesting.
Yeah, I'm just kind of catching up on the chat here. Oh yeah. If there's any influence on temperature, kind of modulation on lucid dreaming. I haven't really heard much about that. Curious if anybody has.
I would imagine that purposeful changes in temperature were more likely to wake people up rather than induce lucidity. But who the hell knows? Maybe like a targeted change in temperature. So if you have like a wristband that changes temperature rather than ambient temperature, maybe, or things of that sort.
Yeah, I think it's typically like when you fall asleep, your core temperature will drop and your peripheral temperature will increase. And it's like,
I mean, I was specifically referring to the temperature of my surroundings at night because I don't really climate control my apartment. And my lucid dreams definitely happen a lot more in like the late fall, winter season. I don't really dream that much during the summer at all.
Interesting.
I know that so just in general, temperature has a really big effect on like how much time you spend in different sleep stages. And as I recall, warmer temperatures give you more REM, so that could be part of it.
Yeah, I've heard. So it's kind of timely. I'm looking at for Aura, we have a hack week next week, and I'm in the group that's focused on like, can we make better use of time series temperature data overnight, and like, can that predict sleep quality overall? Because we just have this treasure trove of like 1 minute, like minute by minute temperature data that we have at Aura, and thinking about it. So at least like I've been just kind of diving down the rabbit hole of podcasts and stuff, and like what I've been kind of like pulling out there, or like kind of high level summary I've heard is like cooling down the core temperature helps with deep sleep and falling asleep. And then REM, it's kind of like you want a little bit of a warmer temperature, but kind of this like Goldilocks temperature where you're comfortable, where like obviously you don't want it like too hot. You won't even be able to sleep at that point. But it's like you want it a bit warmer than deep sleep. So maybe it's like finding the right temperature for the right person that's kind of like in this Goldilocks zone where it's not too hot or too cold for REM.
I think it's like a part of REM that you can't regulate your body temperature, like you're not getting the data from the outside. Well, yeah, there's a bunch of interesting studies about like, oh, you have more REM when it's warmer or whatever, but I think a lot of them are done in rats, and it's probably like, yeah, if it's too cold or too hot and you can't regulate it, maybe that would prevent you from going in it. But I think maybe harder to replicate in humans, but it's really cool.
That's super interesting. Like if you can't regulate your temperature, there's a plausible theory where you would evolve to wait until your temperature is kind of stable. Like if you can't modulate it or like adapt it. That's just me speculating on it. But like if you can't actually regulate it during REM, I imagine there's like certain implications there on, temperature.
Does the chili pad have an API and real-time data? So that'd be interesting to program that thing.
Because your body is going to use less energy to stay warm. Your brain requires a lot of energy. It's a calorie beast from what I understand. So if your like core body temperature is being more regulated by your surroundings, that gives your brain a little more of a jolt, I guess, so to speak. And I would imagine that your brain would be sort of the core, functioning entity in lucid dreaming. Maybe.
Right. And there's the increase in like people usually experience a kind of a gradual increase in temperature as they're waking up. So maybe there's a way to kind of play with that as far as like a relative increase in temperature to kind of, stimulate this kind of rise in awareness that like people see when they wake up too.
Yeah, now I'm wondering what would happen to your sleep state, especially on the coming out of sleep, if you were to sleep over time, like based on the temperature of your room, I guess, and just like modulate the temperature around you and see how that affects your body. I wouldn't even know where to begin with that.
Yeah, it might be kind of like what we're talking about with the auditory threshold, where you don't want it too loud to wake the person up, but you want it loud enough to be an effective cue. Maybe there's an analog with temperature where like you gradually ramp it up to, you know, if there is a direct correlation with increasing awareness, where you don't want it to be too hot, but maybe there's like a gradual ramp up until you get an increase in awareness, or like there's like a way to kind of stair step into it gradually until you find the effective, you know, kind of dose, if you will.
It's another one of those tricky things because like you have different people and different temperature regulations maybe, but at the very least you have different blanket types and materials that preserve or let, you know, out more, you know, heat, and, you know, it's a mess. Different mattresses with different technologies. I don't know, but it's interesting.
Yeah, or if somebody's wearing socks or not at night, or gloves, which I wouldn't advise that.
I use the other half of the bed as a cooling system, and then I get warm here and this cools down, and then I turn back and cool myself again. The cheap chili
There's
pad.
definitely plenty of good studies yet to be had with you know, whether it be 8 Sleep or chili pad or these kind of, you know, cooling technologies. You know, definitely kind of a new frontier there.
They can let me know when they have a silent device. Then I might spend the 3,000 or some crazy amount that they sell that shit for.
Totally, yeah. I've been
Oh
kind
my
of close
God.
to pulling the trigger on the new 8 Sleep Pod 3 cover, but I just haven't been able to like stomach it yet. But I'm thinking
They advertise to me heavily. They know their audience, but boy, that is just a high price.
I will say, like, so Chili Pad contacted our lab a while ago, and they specifically wanted to do some studies on like how does it affect different sleep stages. So if anyone is like in a position where you might be interested in doing that, definitely hit them up.
Yeah, I've been connected to them at Aura for a while, or like Todd Youngblood and them over there.
So hey, Nathan, I had a quick question. So you talked about this a little bit, but how are you determining REM? You know, and yeah, just could you speak a little more about that?
Yeah.
With the Fitbit only?
Yeah. So what we're doing is we take the data. So we take kind of the heart rate time series and the motion time series from the Fitbit. We put them into actually a fairly simple neural network. It's just a multi-level perceptron that we feed the time series into. And what it's trained on is we had people sleep in our sleep lab while they were wearing a Fitbit, and then also while we did conventional PSG and manual sleep scoring. So we trained the system to predict the chance that they're in REM, or to predict whether they're in REM based on these Fitbit metrics. We get an area under the curve of about 0.78 or so in predicting whether they're in REM or not. So kind of it doesn't do it perfectly, but it does it, I think, well enough that we can use it usefully for lucid dreaming.
Yeah, no, that intuitively sounds right. I mean, I think it is a challenge. You just need to be good enough, you know. So and also in your system, you're not worrying so much about false negatives.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, to me, I think the thing that we've learned is the really interesting question, like detecting REM is part of it. But then I think the really interesting question now is like, what do you do once you've detected the REM? And in particular, kind of if it looks like you detect REM and then they're not in REM anymore, do you keep doing the stimulation or do you stop? Stuff like that, I think, is the next thing we're trying to figure out.
And then also there's no way on your system, I guess, to look at tonic versus phasic REM, but you know, because that you could happen to be catching somebody at one or the other of those, and that might be a strong correlation, but you're just, you know, there's just no way to get that, I think, there.
I mean, I do wonder kind of like, suspect you could probably you could retrain the neural network to detect like only phasic REM or only tonic REM. And kind of, I suspect you could probably do that with some degree of accuracy. We'd have to go back and rescore all our data as tonic versus phasic instead of just REM.
So you think that there's a change in heart rate or something like that that actually does distinguish the two?
That is my suspicion. I don't have any data to back it up, but I'm just thinking that they're probably physiologically different enough that you could see something.
I'm curious if Karen has any thoughts on that, if you're on here.
She left, I believe, about a minute and a half ago.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, no, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
I want to say Ben Baird and his group just came out with something about, detect, like quantifying physiology and phasic and REM. I'd have to, maybe on the side here, I'll try to like uncover that paper, but there might be like some fresh data there, or at least like it's triggering a memory around that. But I can try to find that paper.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
I was Googling it. So it says that apparently I always forget which things are in which stage, but like apparently like there's more transient muscle twitches and higher heart rate variability and increased respiratory rate in phasic REM compared to tonic. So in theory, that it seems like you could pick up some of those with a wearable.
Do we have information on which one is more, prime for dreaming or lucid dreaming in particular?
Well, there's definitely studies on that, but I don't remember which it was.
I think that in tonic REM, and so I'm getting this right, the tonic is when your eyes are not kind of like cease to move.
Right.
That you may be more. It may be, who knows why we evolved this way, but that you may be more sensitive to the environment, which would imply that might be the time that that a cue might be more likely to kind of get your attention. And I will say, because I've done experiments with this, and I think that I don't think it's altogether a matter of just like how loud something is. I think it is very much a function of where is your attention. And that's not in the dreaming state, and it's not, and it may be as simple as it's a phasic versus tonic thing, but yeah, so I'm just telling you from my own explorations here.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of want to go back and like try and train just on tonic REM now, because that sounds
I would, I mean, yeah, and I've heard that. It's not just me coming out of thin air, because Karen Conkley has mentioned this before.
Yeah, the some study that Ben and Daniel, I forgot his last name. He's
Morse,
like kind of
Daniel Morse. I talked to him at the
he was talking about this like some study they did with tonic and phasic, and it was it was exactly what you're saying, Bill. Like you can take like the absence of phasic, you are able to take more sensory details in. But Ben was saying that he thinks that lucid dreaming tends to happen during phasic. So there's like a balance of trying to get the signal in during tonic, but then get them lucid, like near the phasic. So it's kind of like a weird dance.
Which is weirdly intuitively right to me, in a certain sense, because it's sort of, without any hard data to back it up.
I actually have a question just based on thoughts I've had for a few weeks. I asked Elliot, Dr. Elikish, about this just as a hypothetical, but I want to ask Nathan, maybe Dash, if you have any input, or anyone else here has input or thoughts. But like, for somebody, for example, say you take this to a level of to be, to do something more than just try to get somebody lucid for wanting to get lucid in the commercial sense. But what if you had somebody who was, like, say, dealing with nightmares, and you wanted to specifically give them an indicator when they're experiencing some type of duress? Are there physiological signs you're able to detect for that? And has anyone given that any thought?
So there's a company actually that's called Nightwear. It's like I just put the name in the chat, and they actually have a product where it tries to specifically do like exactly that with Apple Watches. It detects signs of fear while you're asleep and then buzzes the watch to wake you up and terminate the nightmare. They have some clinical studies too. I'm not sure how good they are, but
yeah, as far as signals, I've heard, it kind of activates the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system. So increase in heart rate, decrease in heart rate variability, kind of overall too. And
what about rapid breathing? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that seems like that would fit with that, when it's like kind of like generally a more activated state. It's more of that like fight or flight branch of the nervous system. So seems like that would fit in.
One thing that kind of confused me about that is, and maybe this is just because this information is wrong, but and maybe you guys have listened to Dr. Huberman. He has like a neuroscience podcast. So he once said in a podcast that when you're in REM, you can't like experience physiological like anxiety. So like, and that didn't sound so right. From my experience, like when I wake up from like a nightmare, I feel like I'm panting and stuff like that. But he was like, that's not possible. And if you wake up like that, you're not actually in REM. And so I don't know if that's true or something, or he was like misspeaking, but if that's true, it seems like it would be really hard to detect a nightmare in REM.
That doesn't sound right at all, but maybe he had a particular scientific meaning of specifically what physical anxiety means in that context. Like that's my best guess, but
yeah, I guess the example he gave was like waking up panting in sweats or something like that. He's like, that's not possible to wake up like that from REM. But I don't know, it doesn't like not like I've actually measured that, but it just seems like I've woken up out of like REM like dreams in that state.
It sounds like, I'm just guessing here, but it might be like a parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system activation thing. And maybe you're not, I guess I might be, I mean, that may just be it. One of those may just be inhibited, by definition, which interestingly might not say that you couldn't be scared, obviously, because people have nightmares that frighten them. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I would venture that it's probably like how you process your emotions, because there's a lot of emotional kind of mental health benefits that come with REM sleep, where you can kind of revisit emotions and make these connections, but then kind of approach them with a different perspective, where you can kind of like reframe the memory to some extent. So maybe it's like something that touches on that, where it's not like your waking state, but you can kind of like relate to past memories and experiences in different ways, where it kind of like takes off the emotional, like negative emotions associated with it, or you can kind of like reframe it more easily in the REM state.
That's kind of what he was saying, and that's why he was saying like that was like his theory of what REM does. It's like it lowers your emotions so that you can like confront situations with like a kind of like what he compared it to, that horse tranquilizer that people take for ketamine. He compared it to taking ketamine and why people take ketamine, that it like separates your emotion from, it's dissociating, and it makes it so you can like process the experience without a lot of emotion. So that's what he was comparing it to. And maybe there's still physiological things that are there, and maybe what he's talking about didn't, like he wasn't talking about hyperventilating, or I don't know, it just seemed it didn't match up with my experience of what I would think were dreams in REM. It just sounded kind of, but like
hyperventilating was the word I was probably looking for there.
Yeah, because I feel like I just feel like I've woken up, and somebody said there were dream reports of, in the comments, Jordan says that there's dream reports of, or thinks there may be dream reports of people waking up in cold sweats from REM. I don't know. It sounded,
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think the thing that he's saying about that kind of REM is involved in emotional processing makes sense. And there's a study that showed that like if you make people like sing badly and then disrupt their REM sleep, they kind of remember it as more traumatic. So I think like that makes sense. I wouldn't necessarily say that means you can't have physiological anxiety in REM, and that part seems questionable. And I'd be kind of skeptical of like just when things are like said that absolutely too. Like I'm like, it's possible like, okay, you have, I mean, you actually definitely do have changes in, you have very low levels of a lot of the kind of neuromodulators involved in stress when you're in REM, but like we also know that people can control their breathing and make themselves breathe faster or slower. So it seems weird to talk about it as an absolute.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One oh, go ahead. Oh, yeah, one kind of like, you know, maybe abruptly shifting gears, but a question I'm curious about, like, have anybody in the group tried a mobile app for lucid dreaming before? And if not, like what are some of the reasons people haven't tried any of these apps yet? And I could offer a few ideas, but figure like if anybody has any thoughts to offer, I'd be curious.
Haven't tried any good ones. And the only ones I really messed with was like Lucid Waker, because at least that one was free and its touchless alarm actually worked. Lucidity was not a fan of that particular app because you either had to pay for it or you had to leave your phone unlocked all night, which I felt to be rather stupid. And I wasn't really getting a lot of benefit from those because I wake naturally multiple times a night anyway, so alarms weren't really doing me any good. And I dream journal by voice recording, so that kind of feature wasn't really helping me either. And so I haven't really used anything since say early 2021.
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Like my general take on like I've kind of like dabbled in some of these, but I've never built a habit in it. And I think a reason I have not is they're kind of disruptive to sleep to some extent. And you can kind of design around that to some extent. But I feel like my hesitation comes from like, I don't want to like interact with my phone or like push buttons during the night. But I think there's ways where you can kind of like set it and forget it and get over some of those objections. But at least like if I'm kind of exploring like, why haven't I tried these as much? It's usually like something I plan to do, but in that particular night, I always want to like, you know, try to prioritize good sleep quality on that night. And they're like, then there never like seems to be a good night to be like, all right, now is like the night to experiment with these kind of apps. Like some of that might be like me with the toddler at home with unpredictable wake up times. So like I'm always trying to optimize sleep at this point. But anyways, that's like some of my top of mind thoughts on like why I haven't dove in as much yet.
I think
I think that's.
I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I think that's TILD, toddler induced lucid dreaming.
Yeah, he's my wake back to bed buddy. Helps me with that technique for sure.
Wake back to wake if you don't take care of them in time.
That's right. Yeah, had that experience a few nights ago.
Yeah, I have like all of them usually they use sound. I like that Lucidly uses haptic stuff. That's cool because the sound stuff is limiting if like you have a sleeping partner. And I do, and they may not want to participate in my wake back to bed experiments. So I don't have a smartwatch though, but there might actually be an extra one somewhere in this multi-generational house I'm in. So I might be interested in trying that because I like the idea of signals that are right. Like I want to try the haptic. I used to try to do it with a buzzing watch, like, but you could only set it to buzz once an hour. So you'd have to like hope that one buzz would happen during your dream. And so I never got the chance to see if I respond good to haptic stuff. Is the haptic like, is it vibrating? Is that what it is?
Basically, it's a vibrational feedback. If anyone here is familiar with the iPhone 7s, their home button isn't actually a button, it's a haptic. And like you press on it, you get a vibrational feedback from it. That's what a haptic is.
So Omar, is that what it is? Just like it's buzzing, it's vibrating?
Yeah, so the watch basically vibrates. You can enable auditory feedback as well. So there is an alarm setting, but you can also disable that. So
okay,
it's only haptic vibration. But yeah.
Yeah.
And there's different, you can sort of customize, there's different types of haptics that you can select. These are all sort of pre-canned haptics from the iOS SDKs, but you can sort of play around with the intensity of the haptics.
I'm
Okay,
curious
cool.
if you, sorry, finish your thought.
I was gonna say, like I know that I don't really incorporate sound well. Oh, hi, is it Connor? I know.
Drawing alarms there.
Okay, no, this is my wake back to bed, buddy. He wanted to say hi before. Hi, Connor.
Yeah.
Bye bye. He's got to make a cameo appearance once in a while.
Yeah.
Over the course of the past 2 years, it's like showing the progression of time. Like how it grows up.
Yeah.
He's like your Stan Lee in the Marvel movie.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just saying I've experienced sound, I've experienced light induction. I respond better to light than sound. I've never experienced the vibration successfully because I've only done the time watch. So it'd be cool to try that. Yeah. And so that's it.
Yeah, and if anybody's interested, I'm happy, just email me and I'll.
I think we lost you.
Email and I can get users to use your app for free. But,
I'm curious if you, Omar, if you've
that.
looked into iOS 16 SDK, because I think the Apple Watch is finally like kind of giving you access to Apple's own sleep tracking, hopefully.
I saw they announced. I have not actually had a chance to look into that SDK. Apple is, pretty interesting. They sort of open up certain things. They kind of limit you in some ways, which is a little frustrating. But I plan on diving into that SDK. I don't know if they've actually exposed their models for inference, but that'd be amazing if they do. I also haven't seen. I don't know if they've published any sort of results on the accuracy of those models. I would imagine that they're pretty good.
I've heard an interview. This kind of answers your question, Brian, also because I think the reason I've tinkered with apps, but the bar for me for REM detection has gone higher over time, and I feel like I want something that's very accurate. I don't have a Fitbit, but I do have an Apple Watch, and I was listening to, I don't remember who it was and from what university, but there's they basically, somebody did a sort of study trying to compare all of the various wrist sleep trackers and the Bedit and all of those ones, and at least they claimed that the Apple Watch kind of was, blew a lot of the things out of the water. I think maybe the exception of the Aura. But this was like several years ago. So, I can imagine Apple with their budget and their obsession about health tracking and fitness tracking might have something pretty good. And especially as they keep adding like different sensors and oxygen, levels and all that kind of stuff, they can do more granular things. Plus it has, pretty granular haptics as well. I think the potential for the Apple Watch to be a sort of low entry point, relatively speaking, device without, especially if you're sleeping with a partner, you don't want to make sounds, or you're sensitive to sounds like me, Apple Watch could be like something really accurate. And if we're piggybacking on Apple's own algorithm building, it could be great. Remains to be seen how much they actually give you access, but they usually increase SDK access over time for their internal stuff. Yeah, so hopefully.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how because they're going to do a multi-stage sleep stage classification. Like, how would that compare to like even Omar's like binary classification, where that's just like maybe an order of magnitude, like easier to get better accuracy when it's REM versus non-REM, versus like having to differentiate between REM and light sleep and deep sleep and awake. Like, there's way more trade-offs you got to make between sensitivity and specificity across multiple sleep stages. But if you can kind of just like, I don't want to use the term dumb it down, but like maybe simplify it is a better term. And in this use case, you probably you only really need REM detection,
Yeah.
So like maybe that's like still the better way to go. Like yet to be seen as far as like how accurate Apple's sleep stage accuracy is, but better route might just be like that REM, non-REM classification method for this use case.
It could be plenty. Yeah. And with an Apple Watch, you're dealing, I know one of the challenges with Aura is the battery life, right? And sampling rate and stuff like that. But I do imagine modes in which I can maybe tell the Aura or whatever device it is, hey, I'm doing, I don't mind charging this every day, or I'm doing a particular experiment, do a low frequency thing until you detect something that looks like REM, then increase the sampling rate. To increase that. I'm sure there could be sophisticated ways to kind of target that. So that could be interesting.
Right. And like some of it is down to device limitations and what kind of like device APIs they have, or like real-time nature. I know like that was a limitation with having the Ring be compatible with the Northwestern app, where Aura Ring, we have web APIs, but we don't have the ability to like stream real-time data yet. So like some of these devices, even if they're relatively accurate in sleep stage accuracy, they got to have the right developer tools available too.
Is in the streaming real-time data, like on the Aura Ring, if you can comment on this, is that because it's too battery intensive, to start talking Bluetooth, or at that point?
It's a combination of things. Like some of it is concern for battery life, because we got to have a pretty small battery in this form factor. Some of it's Bluetooth connectivity with a titanium shell, and having to, do that real-time connection with somebody's mobile device is pretty challenging too. Some of it's bandwidth constraints on the team, which I'm acutely aware of being on the team, as far as like, we have aspirations to build like a whole suite of developer tools, but we gotta prioritize with a few engineers in the team. So it's kind of a combination of things. But
Yeah,
definitely
because it seems like that was, almost like maybe here's a feature request. No, but it's like if you had like a little wristband, like almost just like a little battery pack with a Bluetooth antenna or something, that just there was some way to just, like specifically if you wanted like high bandwidth, sleep tracking. That's for the Aura 8.
Yeah,
I will say, one issue we encountered with our Fitbit devices and just in general is that like none of these companies really want to do algorithms that work well in real time, because kind of real-time algorithms perform less well than algorithms that can look at what happened in the future. So kind of for these real-time applications, the company also just tends to be like, why bother? Which is kind of why we just get the raw data out of the device and then we use our own algorithm that we developed.
No, exactly. It's kind of an obscure, relatively speaking, like that only researchers or somebody trying to do lucid dreaming induction would care.
Yeah.
No, totally. And that's also Aura limitation. We do our sleep analysis on the entire night of data. So, if we were to stream real-time data, we'd have to be using like proxies of accelerometer data or heart rate data. And then it's kind of up to the researcher to kind of use that data to construct that real-time sleep stage classification.
Yeah, give us the raw data. We'll figure it out from there. Don't worry.
So y'all discussing, I think I missed a little bit, but I think you're discussing the ability of streaming something to people in real time, right?
Right.
Streaming data.
Right.
I thought about
it's like an app or something that can do something with it in the moment, as opposed to the better analysis that happens if you've got lots of times to use machine learning algorithms and all that.
I was also thinking about, has anyone here ever thought of doing actual, say, research using equipment in computers and apps, or either a phone or a computer program, and having it where it can be monitored in real time by anywhere from one person or to multiple people. It could be streamed, it could be accessed, there could be engaged ways to communicate. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do, I think, with different types of technology. I've gotten a lot of thoughts out of Michael. Actually, I don't know if you're still here. Michael is amazing, by the way. We've been talking for about a couple of weeks, but a lot of what we've been doing is making some of his Lucid Scribe stuff accessible to the blind. So he's been able to take some of his Halo Vision data and actually make a graph where it'll give you pitches that indicate how far on the graph it is, and give you a way to actually be able to understand stuff. And I've messed around with his Morse code algorithm a bit too. It's pretty interesting, but it gives me a lot of ideas.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And it's again great to see discussions happening in the Discord server that we have now, like getting people connected. I think that's a good example of that. And yeah, I'm hopeful that this community can be like here to experiment with these different apps, give feedback to the app developers, and kind of help give them ideas for their roadmap, and develop projects on our own too, and figure out how to move the field forward. I know we're getting a bit over our scheduled time, but any other topics or maybe feedback for Omar, or thoughts for Nathan, or just kind of general topics before we start to wind down?
I was just going to say, Omar, I thought your approach of using the public data set was interesting. I think that's interesting. We were talking about like, oh, if you have to make your own model, but that means you need ground truth data. So you used the data set that had like just like heart rate data along with the manual classifications, or?
Yes, correct.
Cool.
Yeah. So hopefully, in the future, I want to explore using unlabeled data. So that's a, it has its own sort of unique challenges, but just based on what I've been reading, it might be sort of an interesting approach as well. But yeah, I did use, pre-labeled or data, data that had been generated for studies.
That's cool. Yeah, because I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, at least for us, was just like collecting data. But that's a great way to get at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was curious. How many nights of data did you use? Out of curiosity, if you can share that. I'm not sure.
In our model, we used about 25, and so we found that it actually kind of, what we found is you don't need that many nights of data to generalize well. I think just because kind of like REM, like the features you're looking for are not that complex, but it would also be nice to have more.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And then, yeah, Omar, would it be your plan as you get more and more data over time to then use that to train your algorithms? But like, yeah, you'd have to have that labeled with ground truth, obviously, to to be able to have confidence in that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of been, that's one of the challenges in general, I think, for ML. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can't really take the dreamer's word for it of I had verified REM without them wearing an EEG. That makes sense. Cool. Any other kind of burning questions or thoughts out there from people? I see Bill unmuted.
No, I was just getting ready to say goodnight to everybody.
Yeah, I think it's really good discussion as always, and yeah, super grateful for both Omar and Nathan and Thorge, and just good discussion from everybody today. I think it's always fun to have people talk about what they're working on, and then get ideas from the group. And anyways, really appreciated the discussion today. I will definitely put this on the YouTube channel and share it out to the group. Again, I'll do that through the Twitter handle. It's a good place to keep track of what we're doing at Tech for Dreaming, and then also the Discord server, which that's more for just kind of real time informal discussions. But hopeful that will keep blossoming and being a good place for between events for people to just keep the conversations going. But yeah, definitely appreciate the conversation today. Thanks for joining, and already looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, great event. Thank you, Brian, as always.
Yes, thanks.
Excellent.